Welcome to Celestial Zodiac, your home for clear and grounded astrology. Today we're continuing our exploration of aspects. In this video we'll explain the difference between major and minor aspects, why certain angles are considered more important than others, and how minor aspects add extra detail to a birth chart. Let's back up a little bit and discuss where the idea of aspects started and how they came into the picture. Many people learn about aspects in astrology, but few know where the idea of aspects originally came from. The use of aspects goes all the way back to ancient astrology, especially to the Greek astrologers of the Hellenistic period, around 2000 years ago. Aspects were not invented all at once. Instead, they developed from a combination of early astronomy, geometry, and philosophy, as astrologers tried to understand how planets relate to each other within the zodiac. In early Hellenistic astrology, astrologers believed that planets could see each other across the zodiac. They used the idea that certain positions in the zodiac allowed planets to witness or regard one another, and this relationship was believed to create interaction between the planetary energies. This concept became the foundation of what we now call aspects. Some of the astrologers who helped develop these ideas include Claudius Ptolemy, Vettius Valens, and Dorotheus of Sidon, who wrote some of the earliest surviving texts on astrology. The Greeks also viewed the zodiac as a circle containing 360 degrees, and they believed that certain angles within a circle had special meaning. Because of this, they began looking at geometric divisions of the circle to understand how planets relate to each other. When the circle is divided in simple and balanced ways, it creates the angles that later became the major aspects. For example, when two planets are at the same place in the zodiac, the angle is 0 degrees, which we call a conjunction. When planets are opposite each other, the angle is 180 degrees, which we call an opposition. Dividing the circle into 4 parts creates 90 degrees, which is the square. Dividing it into 3 parts creates 120 degrees, which is the trine. Dividing it into 6 parts creates 60 degrees, which is the sextile. These geometric relationships were important to the Greeks because they believed the universe was built on mathematical harmony. Philosophers such as Pythagoras and Plato taught that numbers and geometry reflected the hidden order of the cosmos, and this idea influenced early astrology. Because of this belief, astrologers thought that planets forming these precise angles would naturally create strong relationships with each other. Later, the astrologer Claudius Ptolemy helped standardize the use of aspects in his famous work called the Tetrabiblos. In this text, he described the main aspects and explained why these particular angles were considered powerful. He focused on the conjunction, sextile, square, trine, and opposition, and these became known as the classical major aspects that are still used in astrology today. Minor aspects were added later, especially during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. As astrology continued to develop, astrologers experimented with dividing the zodiac circle into smaller and more complex angles. This led to the use of aspects such as the semi-sextile at 30 degrees, the semi-square at 45 degrees, the sesquiquadrate at 135 degrees, and the quincunx at 150 degrees. These smaller angles were believed to show more subtle interactions between planets, and different astrologers began including them to add more detail to chart interpretation. Even though astrology has changed over time, the basic idea behind aspects has remained the same for over 2000 years. Aspects describe how planets interact based on the angle between them in the zodiac. It is not the distance between the planets that matters, but the geometric relationship they form within the circle. This idea is one of the foundations of astrology, and understanding aspects is essential for learning how to interpret a birth chart. Let's get back to explaining the difference between major and minor aspects in more detail, why certain angles are considered more important than others, and how minor aspects add extra detail to a birth chart. In astrology, not all aspects are considered equal. Some angular relationships between planets are stronger and more influential, while others are more subtle and used to add detail to a chart. Because of this, astrologers usually divide aspects into two main groups: major aspects and minor aspects. Major aspects are the most important and widely used relationships between planets. These aspects form the foundation of chart interpretation and are present in almost every birth chart. When astrologers analyze a chart, these are usually the first aspects they look for because they describe the strongest patterns of interaction between planetary energies. There are 5 aspects that are traditionally considered the major aspects. These are the conjunction, sextile, square, trine, and opposition. A conjunction is an aspect that combines the energies of the planets, causing them to act together as one powerful influence. The sextile, 2 planets 60 degrees apart, is a harmonious aspect that allows cooperation between the planets and often shows opportunities that can develop with effort. A square aspect with planets at 90 degrees from each other creates tension and friction. That tension often pushes growth, action, and change. With a trine aspect at 120 degrees between planets, we have another harmonious aspect, allowing energy to flow naturally and easily between the planets. Trines often show talents, strengths, or areas of life where things come more naturally. An opposition aspect are 2 planets sitting across the zodiac from each other, creating a polarity between the planets, where the energies must be balanced or integrated. These 5 aspects are called major aspects because they divide the zodiac circle into simple geometric relationships. Since the zodiac contains 360 degrees, these angles form clear patterns that create strong interaction between planets. In addition to the major aspects, astrologers also use what are called minor aspects. Minor aspects are smaller angular relationships that add extra detail and refinement to a chart. They are usually more subtle than the major aspects, and not all astrologers use them, but they can provide additional insight once the major aspects have been understood. One common minor aspect is the semi-sextile, which occurs at 30 degrees. This aspect suggests a mild connection between planets, often requiring adjustment or awareness to work smoothly. Another minor aspect is the semi-square, which occurs at 45 degrees. This aspect creates a small amount of tension, often showing irritation or pressure that pushes change in a less obvious way than a square. The sesquiquadrate, which occurs at 135 degrees, is another minor aspect that can create tension or imbalance that needs to be worked through over time. The quincunx, also called the inconjunct, occurs at 150 degrees. This aspect often shows 2 planetary energies that do not easily understand each other and require adjustment, compromise, or realignment. Minor aspects do not usually dominate a chart the way major aspects do, but they can help explain details that the major aspects alone do not show. Because of this, many astrologers recommend learning the major aspects first, and then adding minor aspects later as your understanding of astrology grows. Understanding the difference between major and minor aspects helps make chart interpretation clearer, because it shows which planetary relationships are strongest and which ones add subtle layers of meaning. Once you understand what aspects are, the next question is how astrologers actually use them when interpreting a birth chart. Finding the aspects in a chart is only the first step. The real meaning comes from understanding how the planets involved in the aspect interact with each other. In astrology, each planet represents a different part of life or personality. The sun represents identity and purpose. The moon represents emotions. Mercury represents thinking and communication. Venus represents relationships and values. And Mars represents action and motivation. When two planets form an aspect, it shows how those parts of life influence each other. To interpret an aspect, astrologers look at three main things. First, they look at the planets involved. Each planet has its own meaning, so the interpretation begins by understanding what those two planets represent. For example, an aspect between the Sun and Saturn will have a very different meaning than an aspect between Venus and Jupiter, because the planets themselves symbolize different types of energy. Second, astrologers look at the type of aspect. The angle between the planets tells whether the interaction is easy, challenging, or mixed. Harmonious aspects like trines and sextiles usually show cooperation between the planets, while challenging aspects like squares and oppositions often show tension that pushes growth or change. A conjunction combines the energies of the planets, making them act together as one strong influence. Third, astrologers look at the signs and houses where the planets are located. The signs describe the style in which the energy is expressed, and the houses describe the area of life where the interaction takes place. This means the same aspect can have very different meanings depending on where it appears in the chart. For example, a square between Mars and Saturn might show frustration or obstacles when taking action, but the exact meaning depends on the signs and houses involved. If the aspect occurs in career houses, it may show struggles related to work or authority. If it occurs in relationship houses, it may show tension with other people. Aspects are important because they connect the chart together. Without aspects, the planets would each act separately, but aspects show how the different parts of a person's life and personality influence one another. This is why astrologers often say that aspects are what turn a birth chart into a complete story instead of just a list of placements. When reading a natal chart, astrologers usually start by identifying the strongest aspects, especially the major aspects involving the Sun, Moon, and personal planets. These aspects often describe the main themes in a person's life. After that, smaller aspects can be used to add more detail and refinement to the interpretation. Learning how to read aspects takes practice, but once you understand how the planets, angles, signs, and houses work together, aspects become one of the most powerful tools in astrology. In the next video, we'll look at another important concept called orb theory, which explains how close planets need to be in order to form an aspect. Thank you for watching Celestial Zodiac. If you found this video helpful, please like, subscribe, and share to learn about astrology, look at your daily horoscopes, and more.